She agreed to swear an oath to tell the truth, but she refused to reveal anything that would harm King Charles. Even in captivity, she protected the crown she helped secure. Over the next month, she endured nearly a dozen intense interrogation sessions. The clerics circled the same 3 pressure points over and over: her visions, her refusal to submit blindly to church authority, and her choice to wear men's clothing. But here's where it gets crazy. They tried to trap her with a theological trick question. They asked whether she believed she was in a state of grace. According to church doctrine, no one could claim certainty about that. If she said yes, she contradicted theology. If she said no, she implied her visions weren't from God. Either answer was supposed to destroy her. And this 19-year-old girl saw the trap instantly. She responded that if she was not in a state of grace, she prayed God would place her there, and if she was, she prayed He would keep her there. No contradiction, no admission, no heresy. Even her interrogators had to admit they couldn't fault that answer. The original 70 accusations were eventually reduced to 12 formal articles. And here's something most people don't realize. Some of the clerics began questioning the process itself. One tribunal member stepped down, saying the testimony felt coerced. Another challenged Cauchon's authority and was promptly imprisoned. That's when it became painfully obvious. This wasn't about truth, it was about outcome. But while the trial played out in the chapel, something even darker was happening behind the walls of her prison cell. So while the courtroom drama was unfolding upstairs, Joan was living through something that flat out violated church law. And this part, it's hard to hear. Under canon law, a woman accused of heresy was supposed to be held in a church prison and guarded by women, usually nuns. That didn't happen, not even close. Instead, Joan was locked inside a secular military fortress under direct English control. She wasn't guarded by clergy, she was surrounded by common English soldiers, men who saw her as the reason their friends had died on the battlefield. Imagine the tension in that room. She was chained to a heavy wooden block, even inside her cell. At times, iron shackles were fastened around her feet. Guards stayed inside the cell with her at all hours, 3 men constantly present with 2 more posted outside. No privacy, no rest, no moment where she wasn't being watched. And the harassment? It was relentless. Later testimony from the 1456 rehabilitation trial revealed that soldiers mocked her, taunted her, and created an atmosphere of constant intimidation. She lived in fear. At one point, she became seriously ill, running a fever, believing she might die, and begged to receive the sacrament and be buried in sacred ground. They denied her. The Earl of Warwick stepped in at times, but not out of mercy. The English had paid what amounted to the price of 1,000 horses for her. She was an investment. They intended to squeeze every ounce of political value from her condemnation. And here's the part that changes how you see the whole men's clothing charge. Witnesses later testified that a powerful English lord attempted to assault her. That's why she insisted on wearing men's clothing. The garments were tightly laced and bound, much harder to remove by force than a dress. She argued repeatedly that it was safer, more proper, to dress like a man while imprisoned among male guards. The judges dismissed that reasoning, but the threat was real. And the legal process? It was riddled with irregularities. She was interrogated for weeks before even being formally read the charges. She had no legal counsel. The trial wasn't held in her home diocese, a clear breach of canon law. Evidence later suggested that transcripts were altered to make her answers sound more incriminating. This wasn't justice, it was choreography. And after months of pressure, isolation, fear, and calculated manipulation, the moment came where everything cracked. So after months of interrogation, isolation, and non-stop pressure, the verdict was basically locked in. On May 23, 1431, Joan was brought before the tribunal again. This time, they told her the theologians, A 19-year-old farm girl, a teenager who literally flipped the script on the 100 Years' War, is now chained to a wooden block inside an English fortress. The same enemy soldiers she once outmaneuvered on the battlefield, they're now standing guard over her cell. No armor, no banner, no army, just iron shackles and stone walls. This is Joan of Arc, the girl who helped crown a king, now accused of being a fraud, a witch, a heretic. Not a messenger of God, they said, a tool of the devil. And the people running the show? English-backed church officials determined to erase her, and with her, the legitimacy of King Charles himself. They didn't just want her dead, they wanted her discredited. From the moment Burgundian forces captured her in 1430 and handed her for 10,000 francs, basically the medieval equivalent of a king's ransom, the outcome was already being engineered. This wasn't a trial searching for truth, it was a political execution dressed up in religious robes. But here's where it gets absolutely wild. This teenage girl, uneducated, no legal counsel, locked in a military prison surrounded by hostile guards, stood toe-to-toe with some of the most powerful theologians in Europe and outmaneuvered them with nothing but her mind. And what happened next? It's the part that makes historians still argue 600 years later. So, here's where we left off. The teenage war hero who once rode at the front of French troops is now a prisoner, chained inside an English-controlled fortress. And the wild part? The people who captured her knew exactly how valuable she was. On May 23, 1430, Burgundian forces seized Joan outside Compiègne. This wasn't just another battlefield arrest. This was like capturing the face of the entire resistance. At 19 years old, she wasn't just a soldier, she was a symbol. And symbols are dangerous. By November, the English paid 10,000 francs to take custody of her. That's not pocket change. That's the medieval version of dropping millions to secure the one person who could either legitimize or destroy your political narrative. They transferred her to Rouen, the administrative capital of English-occupied France. That detail matters. They didn't hide her somewhere remote. They brought her to the heart of their power structure. By December, Joan was locked inside the castle of Bouveril under the authority of the Earl of Warwick. Think about that shift. Just months earlier, she stood beside Charles VII at his coronation. Now she's isolated, surrounded by enemy soldiers, treated not like a prisoner of war, but like contraband that needed to be carefully managed. And here's the strategic genius behind it. The English didn't just want her executed. If they killed her as a soldier, she becomes a martyr. But if they could prove she was a heretic, if they could show that her visions were fake, demonic, blasphemous, then Charles's crown, the one she helped secure, suddenly looks illegitimate. That's when the machinery of the church got involved. On January 3, 1431, an edict officially charged her with religious crimes. The trial would be run by Bishop Pierre Cauchon, a man deeply aligned with the English occupation. That detail alone tells you everything about how neutral this process was. It wasn't. The charges? Wearing men's clothing in violation of biblical law, claiming to receive divine visions, refusing to submit fully to church authority. On paper, it sounds theological. In reality, it was political dynamite. Formal interrogations began February 21st. Joan was brought into the chapel at Rouen and stood before Bishop Cauchon and 42 clerics. 42! Imagine being 19 years old, chained, exhausted, and suddenly surrounded by nearly 50 highly educated church officials whose job is to dismantle you word by word. From the University of Paris had reviewed her case. Their conclusion? Her voices were demonic. Her clothing was unnatural. Her refusal to submit made her a heretic. And if she didn't recant, she would burn. The next day, they took her to the cemetery of Saint-Ouen and placed her beside a stake. Let that sink in. She's 19, weak from imprisonment, surrounded by enemies, staring at the literal structure she'll be tied to and set on fire. And for the first time, she broke. Faced with immediate execution, Joan agreed to sign an abjuration. She recanted her claims. She admitted she had been wrong. In exchange, her sentence was reduced to life imprisonment.
No fire, no public execution, just a cell. They ordered her to put on a woman's dress. She complied. But here's where it gets wild again. Her recantation lasted only a few days. When Bishop Cochon and the other judges visited her cell shortly after, they found her wearing men's clothing again. Joan said she had put it back on of her own will. She claimed her voices, St. Catherine and St. Margaret, had reproached her for denying the truth just to save her life. But testimony from the 1431 rehabilitation trial tells a different story. Witnesses said the guards had taken her dress during the night and left her with nothing but the men's clothes. If that's true, then she was forced into what the court would call relapse. And under canon law, a relapsed heretic didn't get a second chance. On May 28th, she was questioned again in her cell. She stood by her visions. She stood by her decision to wear men's clothing for protection. That alone sealed it. The judges unanimously agreed. She would be handed over to secular authorities. The sentence? Death by burning. And what happened on the morning of May 30th, 1431, would turn a condemned prisoner into something far more powerful than her enemies ever intended. So this is it, morning of May 30th, 1431. After everything, the interrogations, the chains, the psychological pressure, Joan of Arc is about to walk to her execution. In a final act,